Hey everyone, welcome to this in-depth explainer where we're going to follow the money to understand exactly how the massive United States military budget actually works. If you're tuning in from here in the US, this is a real deep dive into where your tax dollars are going. We've got English captions running throughout this entire explainer so you don't miss a single detail of this incredibly complex web. We're going to peel back the layers of this enormous machine, looking at the data, the corporations, and the political systems that literally keep it all running.
Okay, let's quickly map out our agenda for today. We'll start with the $853 billion military budget, break down where the money actually goes, look at the big five contractors, explore the politics of military spending, and finally, redefine American national security. Starting right off with Section 1, the $853 billion military budget and the sheer scale of U.S. defense spending. So in 2023, the total budget for the Pentagon hit a staggeringly massive number, $853 billion. I mean, that number is so huge, it kind of just sounds abstract, right? We hear the word billion thrown around a lot, but this is a massive chunk of American taxpayer money authorized by Congress for a single government department in a single year.
To put that into perspective for us here in the US, that single defense budget is actually larger than the entire economy of Switzerland. Let that sink in. And on the global stage, the US spends more on its military than the next 10 countries combined. And yes, that includes major powers like China, Russia, and India. The US isn't just funding a traditional military to protect its borders. It's funding a sprawling, global apparatus designed to maintain its position as a global hegemon. Moving right along to Section 2, where does the money go? Let's break down the Pentagon's actual expenses. So how is that astronomical sum actually divided up to run this global machine? Well, the largest chunk is pretty wild. $352 billion goes straight to operations and maintenance. That single slice alone is bigger than Portugal's entire economy. This funds the unglamorous but absolutely essential gears of the machine. We're talking transportation, fuel, environmental cleanup for unexploded bombs, and the day-to-day running of about 1,250 military bases worldwide. And that includes roughly 800 bases abroad, where the military essentially builds mini American cities, complete with imported fast food and groceries just to make the troops feel at home.
The rest of the money is just as fascinating. We're looking at $172 billion spent on personnel. That's supporting over 3.4 million active duty soldiers, reservists, and civilian employees. Then there's procurement at $167 billion, which, by the way, equals Ethiopia's whole economy. This is where they buy the hardware like F-35 fighter jets and cruise missiles that run about $1.6 million each. Finally, they pour $140 billion, roughly the economy of Morocco, into research and development, funding futuristic tech like artificial intelligence, drone targeting, and laser weapons.
But here's where things get, well, complicated. Despite having thousands of granular spreadsheets, auditors have pointed out a massive systemic hurdle. The organization is just so vast that it has failed 6 consecutive independent audits. Think about that for a second. Independent accountants were brought in to track the assets, and they found that 61% of the Pentagon's physical assets are simply missing. The department is so huge, they literally don't know where a majority of their stuff actually is. Real quick, before we dive into the private corporations getting the bulk of this money, if you're finding this explainer helpful, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to see this, and subscribe to our channel. It seriously helps us keep bringing you these deep dives into the topics that matter most here in the US. And again, don't forget we have English captions available so you can easily follow along. All right, Section 3, the big 5 defense contractors, and exactly where that taxpayer money ends up. This is where the story really shifts over from a government agency to private industry. A massive 54% of this budget, that's about $466 billion, goes directly to private for-profit corporations, but it largely funnels into the hands of a very select few. Over the last 3 decades, the defense industry consolidated from 51 prime contractors down to just these big 5. Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and Lockheed Martin. Analysts identify this as a serious monopoly issue. The Pentagon is almost entirely reliant on this handful of companies for critical defense capabilities. I mean, if the US military needs a next-generation fighter jet, there's essentially only one shop in town to buy it from.
And without healthy competition, well, critics point out that prices can spiral completely out of control. Because these contractors have a captive buyer in the US government, we see some extreme price hikes. For instance, the Pentagon used to pay $25,000 for a single Stinger missile. Today, they pay nearly $500,000 for that exact same missile. In another investigation, an inspector found the Pentagon was paying Boeing over $3,300 for a basic ball bearing, a part the military literally already had in its own warehouse for about $15. Which brings us to Section 4, the politics of military spending, focusing on political engineering and the revolving door.
So you might be wondering, why doesn't the system just fix itself? Well, the crucial point is understanding how this lack of competition and corporate consolidation fuels a self-sustaining political cycle in Washington, D.C. One major mechanism is what's known as the revolving door. This is the practice where top military officials serve for decades, retire, and then immediately jump onto the lucrative boards of defense contractors. Later on, they might even return to top government positions. They bring insider knowledge and intimate government contacts directly to the corporations bidding for these massive contracts. In 2022 alone, top defense companies hired 672 employees directly out of the Pentagon. It creates an environment totally ripe for conflicts of interest, where future private jobs can implicitly influence current government contracting decisions. But an even more impactful tactic used by these companies is called political engineering. It basically works in 4 steps. First, a contractor gets a massive piece of the defense budget. Second, they deliberately spread the manufacturing jobs for that contract across dozens of specific states and political districts. Third, local lawmakers, wanting to protect their constituents' jobs, fight fiercely for more defense spending. And fourth, the defense contractor heavily funds those exact same lawmakers' re-election campaigns. It's a perfectly engineered, completely self-sustaining loop. To see this in action, let's look at Mississippi as a prime example. A local senator sits on the Vital Armed Services Committee, which helps decide the Pentagon's budget. And, totally coincidentally, the largest single employer in his entire state is a massive naval shipyard run by a defense contractor. So, the shipyard provides vital local jobs, the senator passionately advocates for higher defense budgets to keep those jobs secure, and the defense corporations reward him by heavily funding his re-election campaigns. It's important to note we aren't singling out one side of the aisle here. This happens across the entire political spectrum. The system itself just inherently incentivizes lawmakers to prioritize military spending to protect local economies, rather than objectively assessing national security needs.
Finally, Section 5, redefining American national security, covering deterrence, arms races, and opportunity costs. Let's take a step back and look at the big picture here, because this isn't just about spreadsheets. It's about the overarching strategic choices forced on American society. Now, there's a well-documented argument that a strong military acts as a deterrent, preventing adversaries from attacking and maintaining global stability. But analysts also warn of the arms race paradox. If you endlessly grow your military, you essentially force your rivals to do exactly the same, resulting in a less safe world with thousands of nuclear weapons on hair-trigger alert. You can see this imbalance right in the U.S. discretionary budget. Roughly 50% goes to the Department of Defense, purely a show of force. Meanwhile, a tiny fraction, just 1 to 2%, goes to the Department of State for diplomacy.
Furthermore, every single tax dollar poured into defense escalation is a dollar that cannot be invested here at home. Because security isn't just about missiles and tanks, right? True national security also means domestic economic security. The opportunity cost of an $853 billion military budget is the money not spent on American infrastructure like roads and bridges, safe drinking water, healthcare, and education. A nation is really only as secure as its citizens are healthy, educated, and economically stable. So, as we wrap up this explainer, looking at these super complex financial webs, the massive corporate monopolies, and these localized political feedback loops, we're left with a really critical question to ponder. Does spending more money on defense inherently make the United States more secure? Or has the system simply been engineered to sustain itself regardless of the actual threat?